They said New Year's Eve would be quiet. No guests, no music, no ball gowns swishing across polished floors. Only cold air, tall chimneys, and a sky that looked like iron. Before sunrise the house creaked, the stable chains rattled, the river breathed a thin white mist. Everyone told themselves it was just winter. It wasn't. It was warning. On the main porch, frost lined the rail like salt on a wound. Inside, the lamps made small circles of gold on dark wood, but the house still felt colder than the air outside. The McKenzie men moved the way men move when they think they own time. Slow. Sure. Above rules. Behind them sat a life made from human pain, bills of sale, ledgers, locks, keys, and a basement where suffering had a schedule. Before the sun lifted, one woman had already made her choice. Her name was Melinda. She folded clean cloth with steady hands and a silent mouth. She had learned to hide every feeling because feelings were used against you here. Her sister, Norah, coughed into a rag behind the laundry house, steam rising around her like smoke. They had lived through 1,000 small deaths and still woke up. Today there would be only one kind of death, and it would be final. The year was 1859. The last morning of it. The fields were bare and the trees were thin, but the property felt crowded, with secrets, with witnesses, with ghosts. In the main room, a glass decanter waited for the evening drink. In the office, a small notebook waited for new observations. In the stables, a whip waited for reasons no one needed to explain. No music tonight, the master had said. Too cold. Too busy. Too much to do with numbers and names. But the truth was simpler. Control is easier in silence. Silence makes people think nothing is happening. Silence hides footsteps. Silence can carry a blade farther than a drum. When the first bell rang in the yard, everyone lined up the way they always did, eyes lowered, back straight, mouth shut. A boy dropped a pail and flinched as if lightning had struck. The McKenzie men did not raise their voices. They did not need to. Power here did not shout. It whispered and smiled and wrote things down. Most stories begin with a party. This one begins with breath turning white in the air, a grave with fresh dirt, and a promise spoken under that breath. It will end, Melinda told herself. Not because the law is fair, not because someone important will listen, but because I will make it end. That is how the last day began. Calm as glass, hard as ice, waiting for the first crack. The property stretched along the James River like a scar. 60 acres of wealth that people in town called success. A big white house. Imported rugs. Crystal that caught lamplight like tiny fires. But the beauty was a mask. The house ran on fear the way mills ran on water. Ensign McKenzie was the maker of that mask. At 55 he had eyes like a ledger. Narrow, neat, subtracting what made you human line by line. He told visitors he ran a school. He meant a place for breaking people without leaving bruises where buyers could see. He recorded methods. He measured results. He pretended it was science. It was not science. It was hunger dressed up in words. He had 3 grown sons who learned the trade like it was a family business, the way other fathers teach carpentry or farming. Bertrand was the fist, big, precise, proud of hurting without marks. Philip was the mind that twisted other minds, pitting people against each other for crumbs, turning love into guilt, guilt into obedience. Myron was chaos, a smile with a knife behind it, the one who laughed at pain and kept small trophies to remember it. If anyone asked what made the place work, the answer was simple. Control the day, control the night, control the noise, control the silence. Locks on doors. Grates on windows. Schedules for eating and not eating. Bright light that burned your eyes. Black rooms that swallowed time. A rule for every minute. A punishment for every question. Children learned to spy on parents. Parents learned to pretend they did not hear their children cry. People learned to speak in half words, half looks. Hope learned to crawl, then to sleep. The laundry boiled and steamed until hands bled. The fields took backs and left nothing. The basement swallowed names and returned numbers. And in a study lined with books, a man wrote down the shape of other people's pain like he was drawing a map. If any of this sounds distant, like something in a dusty book, then listen closer. You could hear the place breathe. You could feel the way footsteps changed when a door opened. You could spot the windows that were never used. You could smell iron and vinegar and old cloth. You could sense the way the wind slowed when it passed the main house, as if the air itself refused to be caught. People in town spoke softly about the McKenzie land. They liked to say, "That family keeps order." They did not say how. They did not want to know. The river knew. The trees knew. The walls knew. And the people who scrubbed the floors knew every inch of it. This was not a home. It was a well-oiled machine that ran on broken spirits and called it progress. Melinda had the kind of face people misread. Calm, still, almost empty. That was by design. She learned to lock her feelings behind her eyes and show nothing you could use to hurt her. She had spent 8 years in the main house, cleaning where the family lived, working where the secrets gathered. She learned where keys were kept, which boards groaned, which hinges stayed quiet. She learned the smell of new leather and old blood. She learned how to become invisible in a room full of danger. Norah was younger, 17, with a cough that never let her rest. Steam from the boiling pots coated her face and hair, turning every breath into work. She had hands marked by lie and heat and cuts that never fully closed. She tried to laugh sometimes, soft and small like a bird that learns to sing under heavy branches. She kept a ribbon hidden in her dress, the last thing from a mother she barely remembered. She touched it when the world tilted too hard. They met each night behind the laundry, just a few minutes, just enough to remind each other that they were more than a job, more than a number, more than the line someone wrote in a book. They spoke in quick whispers. They traded tiny pieces of hope like buttons, like seeds. It was not enough to live on, but it kept them from breaking the same way the others did. People like to say courage looks loud. With these two, courage was quiet. It was finishing the task when your hands shook. It was holding your breath when a door opened. It was knowing your body belonged to someone else on paper and deciding, in secret, that your soul did not. The sisters had a simple promise. We leave together or we leave nothing for them to own. For a while that promise felt like a thin thread across a wide canyon. And then the day came when someone tried to cut that thread for good. Anson called it a proposal. He sat behind a desk the color of dried blood, surrounded by books that made cruelty sound educated. He spoke like a gentleman who enjoys hearing himself praised. Words like arrangement, opportunity, north, freedom. He made it sound like a favor. The truth wore a different face. It said, "You will be placed in a special cabin. Your body will be timed, measured, managed. A child will be born and taken. Then, maybe, papers will be signed. Maybe." He talked about Quakers as if kindness could erase chains. He talked about stock as if people were horses. He smiled the smile of a man who never intends to keep his word. Melinda listened without blinking. She was good at that. She went back to the laundry where the steam made their voices disappear and told Norah everything. The cold that month felt like a living thing crawling into bones, sitting behind the eyes. The sisters sat on a low step, knees touching, and weighed nightmares like stones. Stay and drown by inches. Agree and choke on a different rope. They agreed. Not because it felt right. Because it was the only door that pretended to be open. The cabin was built for control. Small windows, wrong height, wrong light. Heat you could never settle under. Sounds that came at night like coins dropped on a table. Never loud, always enough to keep you from sleep. Examinations that were not care, just humiliation with fancy names. Notes taken. Times recorded. A life treated like a problem to solve. They brought a man who moved like a shadow and talked like a broken watch, ticking unevenly. He had scars that had not learned to fade. He had orders to follow and fear welded to his ribs. Anson called him the breeder. He was just another trapped soul used to trap someone else. Months passed like dull blades. Food came when it was least expected, never enough to anchor the body. Sleep came in pieces that never added up. Day by day the edges of the world frayed. The only steady thing was the thought of Norah's face on the other side of the wall. Then pain came like a door kicked in. Too early. Too much. Work made heavier on purpose. A floor slick with red. A girl alone until she wasn't, because Norah found her on the boards and pulled her back from the edge while the house continued to count, measure, plan, profit. The child did not live. The promise did not live with it. When Melinda woke 3 days later, the first thing she saw was her sister's swollen eyes. The second was Anson's neat shoes and neat voice, explaining that failures happen, and we can try again. He tilted his head the way people do when they pretend to care. Something inside Melinda did not break. It froze. Ice is stronger than glass. Ice holds its shape. Ice cuts. From that moment on, she stopped asking the world to do the right thing. She decided to make the world feel the weight of her hands. The forge was a different world. Heat that made the cold step back. Sparks like tiny stars that refused to die. Hammer, anvil, breath. Tobias lived there, a tall man with quiet eyes, a back like a door, and hands that understood metal the way farmers understand rain. He had been sold here young and prideful. The pride was still there, but it wore a different coat, patience. He had learned how the place worked, not just the rooms and locks, but the people. Who drank when? Who lied with a straight face? Who feared what? He knew Anson's hand shook in the morning until the medicine stilled it. He knew Bertrand's sleep could be broken by whiskey and a whisper. He knew Myron hated full darkness and left candles burning low, as if the night itself might bite him. Tobias had lost a daughter named Grace. She was 8 and already too smart to be safe. They sold her south and called it business. From that day he turned himself into something with a goal sharper than any blade. The hour would come, and he would meet it ready. When Melinda was sent near the forge for errands and cleaning, Tobias noticed the change in her. Not noise. Not rage. A stillness that looked like ice on a river, glass on top, a flood below. He did not ask questions. Questions were dangerous. He spoke about iron instead. He showed her how heat changes what metal can be. How 2 good pieces make a better one. How balance matters more than size. How a handle can save a hand. Those were not just lessons about tools. Bit by bit he drew a shape from the fire that did not look like a weapon to anyone who didn't know what they were seeing. Part axe, part long-handled blade. Too heavy for one, perfect for 2. He wrapped hammers in cloth so the strikes would not sing. He timed his work for nights when the wind showed its teeth and covered the sound. While iron glowed, words glowed too, small, careful. He told her about paths that horses hated and feet could love. He told her about caches he had hidden. Food, cloth, a few coins, a flint, a file. He told her about a code they could use. A look held for 3 seconds means now, a touch on the shoulder means ready, 3 taps on a table means change the plan. He asked her nothing about what had been taken from her. She told him nothing about the grave that waited behind the laundry. They did not need to speak those things to understand them. When the blade cooled, they tested the grip together. Left hand, right hand, 2 bodies, 1 motion. The steel made a sound like a breath being taken. In that breath was a promise. We will not ask again. Winter sunlight is a liar. It looks clean. It feels sharp. It hides nothing and warms nothing. They called everyone to the yard at 7 in the morning. Ice crusted the ground. Breath rose from mouths like smoke from chimneys. The 4 McKenzie men stood in a half circle, the way judges do when they want to pretend they are holy. Anson spoke of agreements and failures. He spoke of how Melinda did not deliver, and how only Norah would be sold north, not both as promised. He produced papers to prove lies, because paper is a loyal servant to power. The brothers smirked the way men smirk when they've been taught that pain is entertainment. Then they brought out the whip with metal ends, the one Bertrand kept for examples. He called it a tool. It was an instrument for writing on human skin. He said Norah had tried to run. She had not. It didn't matter. Truth did not live here. Philip held Melinda's arms. Myron counted the blows, cheerful as a church bell. At 10, Norah's legs shivered but held. At 15, she fell to her knees. At 20, she curled small and tried to cover her face with hands that could not hold back winter, much less this. Blood entered the ground the way water finds cracks. At 40, the body was still, but the air was full of the sound of something tearing, something you could not stitch back. They let Melinda kneel in it. Norah's eyes found hers for the last time. "Don't let them win," she whispered. Then the ribbon in her dress went limp and the world dropped a degree colder. Anson wrote notes about responses to stimuli. He did not look up when he said, almost kindly, that Melinda would be easier to manage now. She raised her head. He stepped back. He did not know why he did it. He would never understand the look he saw. It was simple. It said, "I do not belong to you anymore." Behind the laundry, Melinda smoothed the dirt on a shallow grave and spoke no words. None were needed. Ice does its work in silence. Day moved the way it always did, one task after another, one lie after another. Melinda worked with mechanical grace. Dishes, floors, lamps, doors. She passed down halls that remembered her footsteps. She saw the places where keys slept. She counted the breaths of rooms. She measured the weight of silence. Tobias kept the fires right, mended a hinge, checked a chain. He said only the words a man is supposed to say while his mind laid down rails for the night to run on. By evening the patterns clicked into place like teeth on a gear. Anson took his papers to the office. Bertrand walked the stables as if the animals could erase what he had done. Philip disappeared into his small room with a chest of coins and the hunger that numbers give to men who think numbers make them safe. Myron drank like a boy who had never been told no and laughed at stories only he found funny. At 10 the river looked like a long blade. The sky bent low. The wind wished the house good night in a voice that sounded almost human. Behind the laundry, where the earth was still fresh and too soft, two people met for 3 heartbeats. Eyes held. Signal sent. A promise carried. Tobias walked away with a work coat that was heavier than a work coat should be. Melinda went back inside with empty hands and a full purpose. Doors that had always opened for her opened again. Lamps that had always watched her work watched again. But tonight the house was no longer her keeper. It was the stage where the lie would end. Myron went first because chaos is loud and drunk men tell on themselves. He stumbled outside to a favorite tree where he could talk to the night and not be told to hush. He kept a candle stub like a toy and laughed at memories that should have filled him with shame. He did not notice how the wind paused. He did not wonder why the dark felt friendly. Tobias waited in the space between breath and step, where seconds last longer than they should. The blade rose, carried by 2 hands at a time, lifted by all the years when lifting was the only choice, all the hours when rage had to sit still and learn to count. It came down like a verdict. Bone is strong. Purpose is stronger. Myron made no speech. He joined the earth the way all men do, quiet in the end no matter how loud they lived. Inside, coins clicked against coins. Philip's private ritual: stack, count, smile, repeat. He loved the sound like other men love music. The door was unlocked. Why would it be locked? You do not lock doors in your own dream. Melinda entered with a bottle and a glass, the way she had 100 times, a servant serving, a shadow carrying gold. He nodded without looking up because money held his eyes the way chains hold wrists. Tobias stepped from the back of the room and the air changed shape. Philip felt the change before he understood it, the way animals feel storms. He turned too late. The blade did not hesitate. Metal met breath. Warmth sprayed across the stack he loved. The coins rolled. Some fell to the floor and spun there, making a small bright sound that would be the last music he ever heard. He tried to gather them even as his hands forgot how to close. He died as he lived, counting what could not buy him another second. Bertrand came back from the stables and met the corridor as if it were his ally. His mouth was set hard. His hand was close to the gun he liked to touch the way boys touch metals. He saw Tobias first. He opened his mouth. He reached. Melinda was behind him already, arms moving the way they had moved for years to lift and carry and hold. She locked his elbows with a grip born from laundry and grief. He smelled blood and finally believed it could be his. The blade went through the space where a heartbeat lives. His eyes went wide with a knowledge he had denied to others. The body is a small thing when truth arrives. For a second he looked surprised that pain worked on him the way it worked on those he corrected. And then his weight left the world. Anson stayed for last because he had made himself the brain of the place, and when you cut the brain the body cannot pretend it still lives. His office was warm. Papers lay across the desk like fallen leaves with names on them. The quill was still wet. He looked up when the door opened, expecting a son, a servant, a drink, a reason to keep being comfortable. He saw 2 people he had filed under controlled. He frowned, then, astonishingly, smiled a little like an artist who recognizes a finer hand. "Well," he said, quiet and measured, "I suppose I underestimated you. There was nothing to discuss. Melinda took the handle Tobias offered. Fit. Weight is truth. She had given everything this house demanded. The house owed her nothing and would never pay. That is why she chose to collect in a currency it could not refuse. This is for Norah, she said. Names filled her mouth. For Grace. For the ones whose names you turned into numbers. The blade fell, and for once in his life Anson had nothing to write. The office listened to the silence that followed. The lamp flame lowered. The quill dried. The room that had held so many plans now held a different kind of order, the kind that ends things. They burned the papers. Fire chewed through the lists with a hunger that felt like justice. Locks opened. Keys found hands that had waited too long. Money changed shape, from hoarded power to a start. Food, a journey, a winter coat that meant one more mile. Some people ran. Some froze, not from the cold but from years that taught them to move only when told. You cannot blame a cage for leaving marks on the bird. Midnight came like a bell through fog. Somewhere a church announced the new year. On this land the old year did not go quietly, it was carried out. The yard felt different though nothing looked different. Same fences. Same trees without leaves. Same bucket on the well. But air has a weight and tonight it shifted. The machine had lost the hands that turned its crank. They worked fast because speed is a cousin of mercy. Documents glowed orange, curled, and turned to black petals. Numbers lifted, became ash, and left through the roof with the smoke. Keys clinked like tiny bells in the dark and found wrists that remembered how to be light. There is no right way to be free the first minute. Some ran as if the ground behind them were hot. Some could not move and stood like posts, eyes wide, chest fluttering. Some reached for someone's hand and held on like they were crossing a river together. Tobias left coins for those who stayed, not as payment. Payment implies a debt that can be settled, but as a bridge from one shore of life to another. Melinda walked to the soft dirt behind the laundry and knelt. It's done, she said to the ground. You can rest. Then she stood. 2 bundles waited, the ones Tobias had stocked with what matters when the world you know ends. Food, warmth, fire, a tool. The blade was wrapped. It would not cut tonight. It had already done what it was made to do. They did not run. They moved with a steadiness that comes from keeping a plan alive inside your ribs for years. The path toward the swamp looked mean to horses and kind to feet. The sky opened above them like a dark hand offering cover. Behind them, the house stood up straight the way proud houses do when they try to ignore what happened inside them. In time it would learn that pride cannot hold up a roof. When dawn came, smoke drifted from a chimney as if nothing had changed. But word traveled the way wind does, around corners, through cracks, carried in chores and baskets and hymns. People did not say names where names could be used against them. They spoke in patterns. Songs rose and rose, low and steady, with new words tucked inside old tunes. Quilts used blocks that looked like decoration to strangers and like maps to friends. Stories told around fires lost some edges and gained others, but the center stayed the same. A woman who refused to stay small, a man who turned iron into a promise, and a night when fear learned it had limits. Some said the river carried their names north. Some said a safe house hid them through winter. Some said they fought later in uniforms that felt strange on their backs but right in their bones. All agreed on this: they did not regret the blade. The town learned to speak of the land in a different tone. Fire stopped stopping by. The machine rusted because no one knew which lever to pull anymore. Power had mistaken itself for permanent. It never is. Not every story needs a parade at the end. Some need a chair by a window and a silence that lets you hear your own breath. This is one of those. People like to argue about right and wrong in rooms where nothing is at stake. They ask, was it necessary? As if the word necessary ever fed a starving child or stopped a whip midair. On this land, mercy had been turned into a luxury that only the powerful could afford. Patience had been twisted into a chain. The law had become a wall you could not climb unless you built your ladder from your own courage. So they forged the ladder. They forged a blade. They forged a path. What is the lesson? Not that violence is simple. Not that it is glory. It is a last door you reach when every other door has been bricked over by men who sign their names with ink and expect the names to last forever. The names did not last. The wind does. Remember this when the world tells you to keep quiet, when it asks you to wait for a justice that never arrives, when it rewards your silence and punishes your questions. Remember that human dignity is stubborn. It grows in dark soil. It survives cold years. It waits without breaking. And when it moves with a steadiness you cannot bargain with. On the last night of 1859, a dynasty ended without a song. The river kept moving. The fields learned a softer language. And somewhere under a thin layer of earth, a ribbon lay still while the air above it changed. This story unsettles you good. It should. It was not told to make you comfortable. It was told to remind you that some people do not find justice, they make it. And when you have nothing left to lose, you finally discover the weight of your own hands.